Today, we discuss next year's 2025 rookie class. We talk 32 players that we think are exciting, whether they're pretty much first round locks or deeper sleepers. We're going to talk about all the players that we think you need to know. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Justin, joined by David and JP. I'm really excited because I do not play Devy. I don't watch as much college football. I start diving into these rookies a little bit later on. You guys have been playing Devy now for a bit. You guys have been doing a lot of research. So I know I and the viewers are very excited to hear everything you have to say on these players. So we're going to look at this tier base. So we're going to define some tiers. We're going to start with tier one. Can you go ahead and kind of define tier one for me, David?
Yeah, before I do that, I just want to kind of qualify this a little bit. JP and I, obviously, like we said, we play Devy. We watch a lot of college football, but we haven't really, we're not film guys, but we definitely haven't watched much film on this. We only have 2/3 of a season for 2024 data. So a lot of this is very much going to change over the next few months. And then a couple things specific to this. Travis Hunter, there's always the discussion, is he going to be a corner? Is he going to be a receiver? Well, we figure if he's a corner, it's easy to just take him out. So we might as well talk about him as a wide receiver. And also, we are assuming if a player can declare, they will. Again, obviously, that's not how it's going to happen, but we just don't want to guess. We figure we might as well talk about these guys if they have a chance to come out. So with all that said, our first tier, pretty simple. These guys we consider first round locks and potential elite dynasty assets. JP, you want to go ahead and tell the guys who we have in this tier?
I mean, we got the cream of the crop here with Ashton Genty, Ted McMillan, and we did put Travis Hunter in here.
I am curious with Travis Hunter here. We've seen a lot of athleticism from him. Obviously, we're assuming at this point he's playing just wide receiver. Does he really belong in this tier one? Kind of justify that one for me a little bit here, guys.
I mean, I think he does personally. I mean, when you remove the guys in the group of five out all of college football, the Power Four conferences now, top 5 in receiving touchdowns, top 5 in receptions, and top 10 in receiving yards. And obviously that's alongside of what we know of him playing on defense as well. So this guy, he was the #1 recruit in his entire class when he came out of high school. The guy's just got instincts. He's got ball skills and the crazy athleticism. So honestly, if he does play wide receiver, commit to that full time, I'd be very bullish. And from what I've heard is that this year he's been playing X wide receiver as well, even all the more impressive and enticing.
The way I look at it is, I don't know if you have a kid or maybe you played Little League or you have a brother or sister or something that plays Little League. Every now and then you run into that one player who's just so good that it doesn't matter how anyone else plays, they're going to win. Coach never takes them off the field, just dominates on both sides of the ball, or if it's baseball, offense, defense, whatever it is. Travis Hunter does that in college, at Colorado in the Big 12, or once he settles into a position, especially if that's wide receiver for us, that's what we care about. Once he settles into a position, he's going to get to focus on just that position. He's going to get to keep growing. And that's kind of scary considering how good he already is at both positions. He's got almost 0.3 missed tackles per route run, which I think would have been like second or third in last year's class. This guy doesn't get to rest when the offense is sitting on the sidelines. He's out there playing defense, locking up the other team's #1. I think the sky's the limit for him, whatever side he picks. He is one of those guys that's just, he's got it, whatever it is. He's got it.
Yeah, I watch a few games of theirs. I can definitely tell the guy can ball. Just we did not quite have him up here about half a year ago when we did our last report, but I think that might have also been just a little bit more of that unknown positionally then. McMillan we did have as that elite guy, and he still is up here. Is he the prohibitive favorite to be the wide receiver one, first wide receiver drafted still, or has that changed at all in your guys' mind?
I'll be kind of quick because I know JP has been higher on Tet than I have. I've certainly come around on this. I don't think it's quite as clear cut as it is at RB. Genty's clearly RB1. I do expect McMillan to be the first wide receiver drafted in the NFL and in rookie drafts. I think it's a little more in question than running back. The one thing I want to say before I turn it over to JP is this guy's 6'5", 212, and he has 0.4 missed tackles for force per attempt. That's more than Neighbors had, who led the class last year by 0.07. So like almost a full 10th of a missed tackle force per attempt. Just crazy for that size.
He is just huge, and he's the closest thing I've seen to Mike Evans in the modern day, pretty much. Just 10 touchdowns as a sophomore, 1,400 yards and 90 receptions. As a sophomore, I mean, that's incredible production, and he's on pace this year to at least match, if not break that as well. So yeah, I think it's a home run, and I think it's going to be really hard to see him not be top 10 drafted. I mean, his yards per route run is over 3 this year and last year, and that's a really, really good mark. And he has a 20% slot rate as well, which that's very encouraging, because if you're only playing X, then maybe you're going to be more volatile in the NFL. But if you're going to get some slot work, I mean, he's clearly with his size, and you think, okay, maybe he shouldn't play in there at all. But no, I mean, from what you said with the missed tackles for us, he's got enough wiggle to be able to, separate as a slot guy as well.
Yeah, you want to be able to move him around enough that the defensive coordinator doesn't know where he's going to be every time. And that 20% slot rate, I think, says that you'll be able to move him around enough.
Definitely an exciting prospect. Somebody I am hoping to be able to take on a few dynasties next draft season. And just give us a little bit of the overview on the RB. I'll start with David here just because he has been your RB1 in this class for a while now. I have been hearing you rave about this guy. So let all the people know again why you love this guy.
Been high on him for a while and still blown away by his performance this season. I think he has the highest PFF run grade ever, but at least going back to 2019, as far as I went back, just this season, there's two players that have more rushing yards than Genty does yards after contact. So if you were to rate his yards after contact, they would be fourth in the nation in rushing yards. Pretty impressive. At a minimum of 100 carries, he's first in the nation in yards per attempt, touchdowns, yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced, yards after contact, missed tackles forced per attempt, first downs, probably more. But it's such a ridiculous season. I didn't feel like listing more than, those are all important stats. There's plenty more that he leads the nation in. This may end up as the best running season from any college running back ever. I mean, it's not Power 5, so like maybe you can't overcome that, but man, he's just so fun to watch and he's dominating every game.
Yeah, I mean, we're 10 games into this season and he's got 1,700 rushing yards and 23 touchdowns on 7.7 yards per carry. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, he plays at a smaller school. So, I mean, that was part of my concern, just why I didn't have him as RB1 coming into the year. But now he's definitely RB1 for me now. That's a fact. And he played Oregon, which is the #1 ranked team right now. He averaged 7.7 yards per carry against them, had almost 200 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. So yeah, I don't think the competition level is a problem for him. And they look like they're going to be the team that's going to be in the playoffs from the group of 5. So that'll be a lot of fun to see. So let's hope that happens.
Yeah, you say that unless your team is looking at maybe facing them with kind of a weaker run defense than you'd like to admit. I would much rather face a different team there if I was the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, win the Big Ten championship and you're probably not going to have to play them. But if you lose it, yeah, might line up to play against them.
Definitely an exciting tier. Again, that tier, we feel very confident these guys are going to be up here. How do we define our second tier kind of moving on?
Yeah, these are players that have just been very productive. So we're pretty confident in the production in college as well as the draft capital that they're projected for. And these are guys that we feel pretty strongly will be first round picks in rookie drafts. But who do we got here, David?
Yeah, start off with a couple quarterbacks here. Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Got Luther Burden, wide receiver, and then a bunch of running backs. Marion Hampton, Quinshon Judkins, Trevion Henderson, and Caleb Johnson.
RB class, man. It's going to be good.
Sure looks that way.
Definitely an exciting RB class. That's one of the big things that we have heard about for a couple of years now with some of these names. I remember Judkins really coming on as a freshman, hearing that name circling this draft class as the year he'd be draft eligible. Very interesting. And we do have a Buckeyes fan on the podcast here. Him and his Ohio State backfield mate Henderson both being on the same team. You've seen a lot of those guys. So let's start out with those two guys. I'm going to ask, because we had originally, one of you guys had them in tier 2, tier 3, and you kind of flipped. So I don't remember who had who in tier 2 and tier 3, but after a long Discord debate, you guys decided to put them in the same tier. So go ahead, had Judkins in tier 2.
I had Judkins 2 and Henderson 3, and I think JP was the other way.
All right. So give me kind of your justification there, David, because I think this is one of the more interesting conversations.
Talk pro about Judkins, because really it wasn't a negative on Henderson, and after looking deeper, it was really easy to convince myself to put him in tier 2. So as far as Judkins goes, though, he's in his 3rd season, so early declare potential. 6'2", 219. He's got the size. He's already had 2 excellent seasons in the SEC. If you want to consider it better competition than the Big Ten, you're free to do so. But this is his 3rd season with elite competition. This year, his numbers aren't as great, but he's sharing the backfield with Henderson, as we're talking about, and his efficiency is improving, which is kind of what the goal was. Kind of save some tread on the tires too. I had him above Henderson just because I think he has a better shot to be a 3-down back, or what we would consider a 3-down back in today's NFL. I'm just not sure Henderson can handle that load. And so just for the slightly higher ceiling, I do think they're both great backs. They both have great floors, but just a slightly higher ceiling for Judkins.
And I would agree that from a volume perspective, that Judkins does have a higher ceiling. And I mean, when we made the tiers, we had a pretty rough draft. So I can definitely understand having these guys in the same tier, which after fading and diving into the stats, I think it does make a lot of sense. It's just with Henderson, I just was really encouraged by his versatility as a receiver, his efficiency. David, you pulled a lot of the PFF numbers for Travion's efficiency, and that's just what really intrigued me. Is I just think that he's such a great athlete, and with that efficiency, I think that maybe in the NFL he might have a higher ceiling, but not from a volume perspective. I definitely get that pulled from PFF that he hits a 10+ yard run on over 25% of his carries. Only 3 of the 18 running backs we started to collect data on had over a 20% rate, and Henderson's rate was at 26.6, which is 4% higher than second place. So I don't know. This is just I kind of see him maybe not Jameer Gibbs because he's a different level of athlete, I believe. But I kind of see him as like maybe an Aaron Jones guy that where even if he is a 60% of a backfield, I think that he can be efficient enough to be a potentially an RB1 even then.
I think Aaron Jones is a solid comp. I think something that really both of these guys, but specifically Travion, he's an insane blocker. That might have been through his whole career, but I honestly don't remember it from previous seasons. I've seen some blitz pickups where he just puts linebackers on their ass, like blitz, bigger guys than him and everything. I've seen him out lead blocking for Judkins or for Will Howard, and he's flattening linebackers. Like, I know that doesn't give you fantasy points, but it does keep you on the field.
Yeah, and I do think Judkins is probably more durable. He's proved at least through their college careers as well. I will give him that for sure.
Yeah, I think the real tiebreaker will end up being draft capital, which is obviously a bit of a cop out, but also very true for pretty much everything here.
Yeah, if it's not draft capital, will be landing spot. Definitely two exciting running backs. Excited to see where they land. Go ahead and give me just a quick pitch for Omari. Am I pronouncing this right? Omarion Hampton?
Omarion, yeah, I think so. Omarion, maybe? I'm not sure. He's also a true junior, so he could also early declare. He's also good size, 6'1", 220. He's now putting together his second really good statistical season. This year, 213 carries, 1,178 yards, 13 touchdowns. Last year, 254 carries, 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns. Not a useless receiver. He's got 1.33 yards per route run, which is pretty solid for a running back. 55 receptions, almost 500 yards over the last 2 seasons. So definitely not useless there, but you're not going to split him out wide probably. One of his issues was he had 5 fumbles in his first 2 seasons, over 343 carries. Has not fumbled this year on 213 carries. So, with his production profile, doesn't really have a weakness that I see. Good size and age. I think all he has to do is test well, and that could definitely make him the RB2 in this class.
My concern coming into the season was that with Drake May leaving UNC, that maybe he would really have a tough time without having a real threat at quarterback. But no, he has been just as great, which is very, very encouraging without having that kind of high-end quarterback threat. So, yeah, he definitely deserves to be in this tier. And just real quick, I'll touch on the last running back we have this tier, and it's Caleb Johnson. This is a guy who was relatively off the radar, and he has just really, really climbed up here. He's got good size, 6 foot, 225. As a junior, got a lot of guys with good size in this class, which makes you think that there will be a lot of guys potentially leading backfields and why we're so bullish on this class. But he has 1,328 rush yards, which is second in the nation right now behind only Genty, and 20 rushing touchdowns at 7.1 yards per carry. I mean, man, he's been very, very impressive. He's above average in first downs per touch, yards after contact per attempt, his tackles forced per attempt, and 10+ yards runs per attempt, and his PFF grade. So all of these advanced metrics, he looks very good. He didn't really have much production as a freshman and sophomore, but when you see that somebody's capable of this, yeah, he deserves to rise up.
Definitely an exciting RB class. Love getting a little bit more information on those guys. I'm sure our audience does too. Appreciate your guys' research there. Now, a name I definitely recognize from before this season, Luther Burden, a guy we had right up there with Tet McMillan as the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 in this class going into this year. A lot of people had him there. David, will you maybe be able to do a victory lap on Genty? I want you to tell me, are you overly concerned? Are you thinking that we might need to kind of like really readjust our expectations? Give me a little bit of the skinny here on what your opinion.
Definitely is a little disappointing this season. He's still shown signs. The last offseason, Burden versus McMillan was probably the most fun JP and I had discussing this class. We were very much back and forth on who wide receiver 1 was. I was in the Burden camp, and unfortunately, it only took like a week or 2 for me to come around onto the other side of that because Tet is just dominating. But look, I haven't really heard this being talked about. I just think Burden's going to come back in the world of NIL. He's going to transfer to a more high potent offense, maybe more creative offensive coordinator. still get millions of dollars in an NIL deal, and then come back and threaten to be wide receiver one for the 26 class. I could definitely be wrong. You know, an NFL contract is more than NIL by a lot, so he could definitely declare, and I still think he'll be a first round pick if he declares. What he's best at is with the ball in his hands. He has just shy of 10. He's at 0.39 missed tackles forced per touch, and that still would have been best in last year's class. I would expect him to do most of his work in the slot, but as a freshman, he played outside. So if he comes back, he might be able to prove that he's not just a slot player. And then I will throw a player comp out because I don't love player comps, but I do think this one makes sense. Kind of reminds me of Jaden Reed. You're gonna be able to get him the ball quickly, get him on end arounds, get him in screens, and then he's just gonna go make plays with the ball.
Didn't give the old classic Debo Samuel comp. That's probably a good thing.
You know, it's kind of like a cop out to not using the Debo comp now that Jaden Reed's doing what he's doing because they do very similar things.
Yeah, and that was part of my concern with Burden was just I didn't think that he was quite the outside receiver that Ted McMillan was, and just where he really excelled, I thought was kind of more in the slot, the shorter intermediate area. Which I mean, if he gets invested in and has a creative offensive coordinator, that's the kind of guy that you're going to get design touches for and everything. So it might give him, a pretty good floor for fantasy, which is still pretty exciting. And what he did as a sophomore is very, very encouraging. He's missed tackles forced per attempt. That's still very encouraging stuff. It just really stinks that his production this year it's really not been that great. But we still like him. And like I said, I think if he does get drafted in the first round, he's still going to be an exciting player that we're going to be investing in.
Would have loved to have seen him live up off of the hype just because more tier one players just really helps our dynasty, our stashes of picks that we have. Another thing that really helps our picks, helps really elevate the value of all of them are, since we're playing in Superflex League, more quarterbacks. Give me a little bit of the skinny on the two quarterbacks we have in here. Most importantly, who's going to be the QB1? I want to know, guys. And I know you guys know with 100% certainty.
I mean, I think it's probably got to be Cam Ward at this point. I mean, he leads all of college football in passing yards, passing touchdowns. He has 32 touchdowns right now to 6 interceptions. He's the quarterback right now that's getting the Heisman potential talks right now. So there was some uncertainty. There was a really weird thing. He was projected to be like a day 3 quarterback. There wasn't much buzz around him. Then he came back, and my gosh, he's been really, really good. And I thought that he was going to be a lot older, since I thought he was, I don't know, coming to the draft potentially, but he's only 22 years old actually, so that's really not too bad. But he leads all quarterback prospects in big time throw rate, and he's barely behind Milroe in PFF run grade. And this is a guy, when you watch him manipulate the pocket, that's kind of like his superpower, is just the way he's able to, he has that pocket feel where through a muddy pocket he knows how to manipulate through it. So I think that's probably his best thing in extending plays. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that Patrick Mahomes trait. I'm not saying he's Patrick Mahomes at all, but kind of what he's able to do in the pocket. That's what I really like about Cam Ward. But just with that Heisman talk and the NFL draft buzz, he seems like the guy who's the favorite to be QB1 right now.
I think we got a viral clip here. JP on Cam Ward kind of looks like Patrick Mahomes.
I would take us going viral in any way. That's fine.
Yeah, for real, right? I think that's how you start getting ads and stuff, right? I will go ahead and talk about the other quarterback we have in this tier right now. A lot of it, I'll be honest, is hype based. I mean, he does have a very good statistical profile. You watch his arm talent; it's for real. It's NFL level. But there are concerns about how long he holds on to the ball, some decision making. I guess that kind of ties into holding on to the ball. I do kind of question if that's just because that's what his team needs him to do, though. Hey, they're winning. They might win the Big 12. They're going to be going to a bowl for the first time in several years. And despite holding on to the ball too long and taking sacks, he doesn't really turn the ball over. He doesn't put it in danger. He's thrown more interceptions than he probably should have. Only 1.2% turnover worthy plays. That would be second if you include the 10 quarterbacks I looked at this year in last year's class. Bo Nix is the only one with a better at 1% turnover worthy plays. Depending on landing spot and draft capital, I do think there's a chance Ward or Sanders could rise up to the 101. I think Genty's got a pretty good hold on it, but it's that quarterback thing, If they end up going as the first pick in the NFL draft and we like the landing spot, I think either of these guys could rise that high.
Definitely interesting names. I am curious, out of the two guys, who do you feel like has more of that like absolutely groundbreaking rushing upside from what we have seen so far? Do either of these guys have that game breaking Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels type of upside? Like, where do we kind of put their athleticism?
Yeah, definitely not. Maybe there's somebody in the next tier that we're going to talk about, but No, I don't think either one of the guys. Definitely not Shador Sanders. Ward's a little bit more athletic, I believe, but no, not to that degree. That really is Konami code type of quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I think they both have enough athleticism to survive and give you a little bit rushing, but they're not gonna break the bank there.
At the point with what we're looking at, of course, things could change. Is this one of those classes where we really don't expect the 101 in a super flex rookie draft to be a quarterback unless things really shock us? Or what are you guys kind of thinking right now? David, I'll go to you first.
Well, I mean, just based on the tiers, I think that's safe to say. But like I did say, if the draft season goes, in favor of one of these two guys, or maybe even one of the people we talk about later, I think there's an outside chance they can still make the 101. Genty's just been so dang impressive, and that's the other thing is from the other side, he's not a non-power 5 school. If maybe he doesn't test well, or gets a nagging injury or something over the process, or some little knock here or there, maybe he falls to the back of the first round, high, early second. I don't expect that, but realistically, you can't say that there's no chance.
And let's go ahead and let's move on to tier 3. David, I believe it's back up to you to define this next tier of players, what we're kind of looking for in this tier to the fine folks in the audience.
Yeah, look, there's still a ton of upside in this tier. Mostly we were trying to look for players that we consider late first, maybe early seconds. So just, a few holes or a few questions, comments, concerns. Some guys that could definitely be difference makers on your Dynasty roster. JP, you want to go ahead and tell us who's here?
Yeah, we've got Emeka Egbuka, Trey Harris, Nick Singleton, Tyler Warren, and 2 more quarterbacks in Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart.
All right, so since we just added with the quarterbacks, let's just start with quarterbacks again here. We're a super flex show, and you teased me with some tantalizing rushing upside. The next Jaden Daniels, you heard it here first. No, of course, not necessarily predicting that. So who is the best rushing quarterback, in our opinion, in this class then, guys?
JP, you want to talk about him? I know he's your guy.
I want to talk about Dart. So I'll let you talk about Milroe since he's talking about.
Yeah, look, he is a guy that provides by far the most rushing upside in this class. He's averaging 18.1 fantasy points per game on the ground. I know it's college, so it's a little different, obviously, but man, you get anywhere near that, and the passing is just extra. Now, like I said, I know that's not exactly going to translate, so there are concerns about him as a passer. I think he does enough that he could end up getting the draft capital we're looking for. Saw a really nice progression with his pressure to sack rate last year. It was 31.9%, which is just really high. Cut that almost in half down to 16.9%. He's also improved his time to throw. He's also improved his turnover worthy play percentage. And all that has come at the expense of lowering his big time throw percentage. I don't know if that's the new offense or if that's just him growing as a player to be, take what the offense or take what the defense is giving you. I think the big thing for him is whether he declares or not, to be honest. I think he's got a good shot of coming back. If I look at what's happened to Anthony Richardson and I'm Jalen Milroe, I say, if I'm not quite ready, I'm going to stay here in a good situation at Alabama, take some more NIL money, develop, get reps, because these guys, they got really short leashes in the NFL these days. If you're not quite ready, develop in college one more year. I think we're going to start seeing that more and more. I think it makes a lot of sense for Milroe.
He definitely is somebody that we have to pay attention to in fantasy football if he does get somebody that invests into him. I mean, right now he has 16 rushing touchdowns just on the ground, and we still have a third of the season still left. And he has 565 rushing yards. That's even after stupid college rules where they take away sack yardage from your rushing yards. He's got to be pretty close to 1,000 yards. He should be over that by the end of the season if you take out the sack yardage. So yeah, definitely a Konami code player for sure. And against Georgia, I mean, he had one of his best performances this year. They've got so much talent over there on defense. And he had 374 pass yards and 117 rush yards with 4 total touchdowns. And a lot of the guys that I listen to, they say that he looked like one of the best athletes on the field. And that's NFL defenders, at least guys that are going to be in the draft for the most part. Very encouraging stuff, at least from what we saw last year to this year. Like you said, the big time throw rate coming down, it's a little bit of a concern. And we're still have some concerns of him as a passer. But one guy that I don't have as many concerns about as a passer is Jackson Dart. He's one of my favorite guys probably in this class. I mean, playing in the SEC, he has the highest passer rating in all of college football and the highest yards per attempt in all of college football. That's even with Trey Harris, who we're about to talk about next. He's been out for a few games, but he's a 70.8% completion percentage, which that's really impressive for a guy who's averaging over 11 yards per attempt, leading all of college football, and only 4 interceptions. I don't know. I just think this guy needs to have a lot more buzz. He's only behind Cam Ward in passing yards, and he's the youngest quarterback we're going to talk about today besides one other later round guy. So, man, it just really baffles me that he is not talked talked about higher. If I had confidence in him being a top 5 pick, if he had the same draft capital buzz as Cam Ward and Shador Sanders, I would definitely have him up there in that same tier, if not maybe prefer him.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you, man. Like, I don't watch film. Maybe there's something out there that someone who watches film can point out as to why he's not getting the buzz that I think he deserves. He's going into his third year. He's listed at 6'2", 225, I want to say. Yeah, 6'2", 225. Oh, he's going into his fourth year, sorry. Third year at Ole Miss. But every season at Ole Miss, he's got some rushing. This year, he's just 97 yards short of 500, which would give him over 500 rushing yards in every season at Ole Miss. Give him about a dozen touchdowns if he doesn't improve on that. I hear a lot of people that watch film like to see how quarterbacks do from a clean pocket. He's got a 94.4 PFF grade with no pressure. He's good in the intermediate passing game. He's good short. He's good deep. Like you said, he has the highest depth of target, I think you said. He's got the most deep yards. I mean, I just don't know what there is to not like about this guy. But like you said, unless the hype picks up, ends up getting that draft capital, then it's kind of hard to put him with those other two quarterbacks right now.
And then we see late QB risers every year. I kind of expect him to be one of those guys. And we saw it with Anthony Richardson, JJ McCarthy after the season. And it's like, oh, wait, look at this guy. And kind of think that if he does get that rise, which is not a guarantee, that, yeah, I'm definitely going to have him in a tier higher, if we feel better about the draft capital.
And moving on to a player I'm very interested in because I've been hearing his name for a while. The stock has been dropping for a while as well. Your OSU Buckeye, David Emeka Ibuka. Go ahead and give me a little bit of the skinny here on him. I'm honestly dying to know your perspective here on what is going on.
Yeah, definitely disappointing season statistically. It's definitely making excuses, but this is a run-first Ohio State team with two elite running backs. They throw the ball well, and they try to spread it around, or they hyper-focus on the incredible elite freshman they have, Jeremiah Smith. You don't like to get outplayed by a true freshman when you're a senior, but when it's that true freshman, I'm willing to give him a pass. Jeremiah Smith is insane. If you don't know who he is, watch some highlights. It's really fun. He's 18 years old. Keep that in mind when you're watching those. He could leave as Ohio State's all-time leading receiver in receiving yards still. So it's not like he's playing poorly. His best season, Marvin Harrison was across the formation from him. They almost had the exact same numbers. So he can do it, and I still think he's going to be a good player. He's a great leader for the team. I think he's going to get decent draft capital, late first, early second. Kind of like Burden, he's also an extension of the run game. Great with the ball in his hands. So he might not be the receiver one on his team, but he'll be a starter for fantasy teams, I believe.
Yeah, he makes me think that he's probably more of a wide receiver two in the NFL. And I mean, he seems like a pretty savvy player that you can trust in a passing game. But just part of my concern is just that one really good season was with C.J. Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's like, okay, how much of a role does the incredible C.J. Stroud play in that? It's really tough to say. And like you said, being outproduced by a freshman, it's a little bit of a tough look. But Jeremiah Smith, he's kind of a generational guy. We knew that coming out of high school. But still, yeah, it's not a good look. But I still think that he's going to be at least a guy that's drafted day 2 for sure. I mean, that sophomore year, that was a really good year. And I still think he's got some really good traits with his speed and ability in space.
I also think he'll kill the interview process, which NFL teams really like. So I do kind of think he'll go late first. And if that happens, like if he lands with the Bills or something, we might be rising him up. Rams, sure. And yeah, especially if Cup moves on. But like if he gets in one of those high-powered offenses that's already set up, then he doesn't have to lead the team in targets and be that guy. I think that could be great for him and great for his fantasy managers.
And JP, other wide receiver in the tier here, Trey Harris. Go ahead and give me a little bit on this guy here.
I mean, he's arguably been the most impressive wide receiver in all of college football this year. I mean, this is the teammate of Jackson Dart, who I just talked about at quarterback. Definitely one of the biggest risers this year. He is, though, a fifth-year college player. But he's got good size at 6'3", 210 pounds. He's at Ole Miss in the SEC there. And he has missed the last, I think it's like 4 or 5 games. But before his injury, dude, this guy was balling. He was averaging 141 receiving yards a game, which would have been putting him pretty close to 2,000 receiving yards on the season if he would have continued that pace. He had a 5.25 yards per route run. Over 5. Oh my gosh, I think the only person I've seen do that is like Devontae Smith or something coming out of college. That's absurd. We normally think that something over 3 is a really, really strong number. But yeah, 5, that's insane. Honestly, he's probably the second best outside wide receiver behind just Ted McMillan in his class.
I agree with you there. I had him as a sleeper going into the year, but I did not expect this kind of rise at 5.25 yards per out run. Like my eyes popped when I saw that. He's also got 0.19 first downs per out run, which would have been top in last year's class as well. He's a chain mover. He's a big outside receiver. he makes plays down the field. Obviously, with Jackson Dart being so good down the field too, that really helps him out. Once Tet's off the board, if a team's looking for an outside receiver, I don't expect Harris to be the second receiver off the board. But if Hunter's a corner, I think Harris could be the second receiver off the board.
Now, is this like a Xavier Legette absolute anomaly of a season where we saw nothing, 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 and then super senior breakout? Or did he at least, I mean, you said you had him as a sleeper, so he at least has shown something before this, up to this point. Is that kind of correct?
He was at a small
Well,
school, Louisiana Tech, coming into college. In his second year, he had 572 yards, then 935 yards before transferring to Ole Miss. And he had 985 yards last year as well. And yeah, then this year he's really, really taken off. So no, statistically it wasn't.
Okay. Love to hear that it's not that fifth year just out of nowhere like a Legette situation. So if he gets that draft capital that we always hope wide receivers get, he has, although he's a little bit older, not an early declare, of course, a little bit less warts than perhaps that type of profile. Good to see. And tell us a little bit about the only running back we have in this tier, Singleton.
when he was coming into college, he was very hyped. People thought he would be the running back one in his class. It's hard to say he's disappointed so much so as other players have just excelled. He has had some issues here and there. After his freshman year, we wondered if he was a good pass catcher. His last 2 seasons, he's excelled in the passing game to where it's not a weakness, but a strength. Put up some pretty good seasons statistically. He's in a bit of a timeshare this year, so kind of like the Ohio State backs, the overall numbers aren't great, but the efficiency numbers are solid. It'll be interesting to see where he gets drafted. I think you could at least make a case that he belongs in the same tier as the four guys we talked about in tier 2. We just didn't quite have that conviction on him.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of high school, he was a freak athlete. And then as a freshman, yeah, he put up over 1,000 yards. That sophomore year, he had 4.4 yards per carry. He just did not look the same. I heard concerns about maybe his vision and running up the middle was a big concern. He wanted to bounce stuff outside a lot. But then this year, he did start off kind of hot, but the last few games have been down. I looked it up, though. He has been playing with some injury. He's really a high upside kind of a player, though. I mean, he's 6 foot, 227 pounds. And like I said, freak athlete. So this could be a guy that rises. But honestly, this is probably his floor kind of a ranking.
All right, definitely a name to keep an eye on. And we have a tight end in this tier. Is that a tight end spotting, guys? Go ahead and tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, that is a tight end spotting, and we were very on the fence about whether he belongs in this tier or the next one. He's 6'6", 260, so a little big, but testing will be very important for him because of his size. If he can show he's athletic at that size, that could be a benefit. And look, he's got 13 carries, 94 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns on the ground this season. Tight end, 13 carries. Pretty darn good. Also at 0.2 missed tackles forced per attempt. It's not elite, but it's very good for a tight end. We're not talking like Brock Bowers athleticism. Those numbers make me believe that he's going to test well at his size. That's going to be the biggest thing for him personally. He's got a solid statistical profile, but like last year he was playing alongside Theo Johnson, who's now with the Giants. He's never really had like an insane season. Yeah, definitely someone we're pretty high on. When I watched Penn State, Ohio State a couple weeks ago, he's definitely stood out to me.
Yeah, and last year when he played with Theo Johnson was a senior, Tyler Warren was a junior. And Tyler Warren, he actually outproduced Theo Johnson. They had actually the same amount of catches and touchdown, but Theo Johnson had almost 100 more receiving yards, which, we know Theo Johnson's an incredible athlete. And actually, Theo Johnson in his first 10 games, 7 of those, he's had 3 or more targets. So, I mean, he's been fairly good in the NFL, I'd say, just relatively for a guy who's early 4th round. Tyler Warren, he's stepping it up even more. He's being more productive than Theo Johnson was last year. Of course, they kind of played with each other, but he had a 17 catch game for 224 yards against USC. So that makes me think that this guy, he really does have a lot of upside.
Especially in the tight end premium leagues, definitely a name to keep an eye on. So we're going to move on to our tier 4 and eventually our tier 5. For the last 2 tiers, we went very in-depth on our first 6 tiers here. Did a lot of research, a lot of deep dive statistically. Did not do quite as much on all of the other sleepers. A little bit more surface level investigations. So we won't be going quite as deep on all of these players, but we'll still be giving you a brief little justification on why we have them where they are with the occasional next level stat. That being said, JP, go ahead and kind of define our tier 4 players.
Yeah, these are going to be guys that we think have a shot to be round 2 rookie draft picks, but they could fall to round 3. These are more so just like interesting guys that we at least feel fairly good about. David, who do we have in this fourth tier?
Yeah, I'll start off with a couple of names that might be recognized here. Garrett Nussmeier, Drew Aller at quarterback, Colston Loveland, the tight end, Jonah Coleman, Dylan Sampson, and Devin Neal, all running backs to round out the list.
No wide receivers.
And starting with you, JP, give me the guy you're most interested in talking about in this group.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with the quarterback. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier, he was somebody I was pretty interested in before the season started. Largely it's because he was rumored to be in a quarterback competition with Jaden Daniels both years that Daniels was at LSU, which is, who knows how real that was, but it's at least somewhat notable. And his dad is also a quarterback coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. So it makes you think that, okay, maybe this guy can put it together mentally. And he's had this time to sit. He's a little bit older now, though. He's had to wait his turn for quite some time. I mean, he's only taken 6 sacks in the year. I think that's one of the most impressive things about him. Is this guy just does not take sacks, and he plays like a gunslinger. If he can play aggressively and put things together mentally without really getting sacked a lot, I don't know. There's definitely some signals that he could be a guy that rises. I think he might return to school because this is only year starting, but he's definitely somebody I've got my eye on.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and just talk about the other quarterback real quick. There's someone else I want to touch on in this class or this tier just because we're on Nussmeier here. I'll talk about Drew Aller. He's 6'5", 235, very highly touted prospect coming into Penn State. He's in his true junior year, so it would be an early declare. Look, he's had some good seasons, but nothing really eye-popping. He's graded well in PFF's grading. He does a little bit on the ground. I really think he's going to come back. I think Nussmeier will as well. But if he does declare, I think he could end up maybe a second-round pick as kind of a project player. Maybe you draft him and stash him on your bench for a year, and then he's starting somewhere. Definitely a lot of upside. Love the size, love the athleticism. Still a lot to prove, in my opinion, to be a true franchise quarterback.
Who is the RB1 in this tier? The guy you guys like the most?
Well, I'm still sorting through that, to be honest, but the one that I want to talk about the most is Jonah Coleman. He really jumped off the page to me when I started looking at the data from this season so far. He wasn't really on my radar, honestly, before we started prepping for this show, so it's kind of fun when you get a new name on your list. Definitely looking forward to looking more into him. On the 18 running backs I've started to get data on, he's above average or at average on first downs per touch, PFF offensive grade, yards after contact per attempt, missed forced tackles per attempt, 10-plus yard rush per attempt, and just slightly below average on yards per route run. But he's over 1. Missed tackles forced per attempt of 0.37 is second to only Genty. Grades well as a pass blocker. He's 5'9", 229 in his third year. I think he's got a chance if he declares to maybe not be a 3-down back, but to lead his backfield. Definitely looking forward to looking more into this player.
Really have my eye on is somebody that's really intrigued me is Devin Neal. I'm coming out of high school in I know it was his first year in college. I think it might have been his second year as well, that he was also playing baseball. So he didn't know which sport he was going to choose actually. But I mean, even still as a freshman, he had 700 rushing yards. As a sophomore, he had over 1,000 yards. Last year as a junior, he had 1,280 yards. And throughout his career, he's just been this efficient running back. He's averaging almost 6 yards per carry in his career. This year, he's also off to a season that looks like it's going to be over 1,000 rushing yards, but he's just never gotten the full reins of a backfield. This guy, like I said, he's been efficient. He's a receiver out of the backfield. And from everything I hear is that he's a really good athlete as well, that he's got really, really strong burst. So this is somebody that, maybe he's not going to lead a backfield, but kind of like what I said, in a similar vein to Travion Henderson, that if he's a guy who can be efficient, be a pass catcher, that he could be somebody that is a round 2 pick potentially if somebody invests in him. And I don't know, he's somebody I think that could be a guy who maybe leads a timeshare. I mean, he's 215 pounds too, so that's at least his listed weight. Combine's going to be huge for him, though. And the last running back we have here is Dylan Sampson. And I mean, he's at Tennessee. I know Tennessee guys have gotten knocked a little bit because the way their offense is so wide open, but he's got 20 rushing touchdowns in the year. So this is definitely somebody that we have to keep an eye on. Other than that, I just don't know if he's going to get the draft capital at this point.
And don't need to do a deep dive on our tight end in this tier, but is he definitively in a different tier for both of you guys when we're comparing him with Warren from our previous tier, or could you definitely see this one flipping depending on draft capital, landing spot, etc.?
I think it could definitely flip. The Michigan offense is very down this year. Loveland's 6'5", 245. He was the projected tight end 1. He's a true junior. He's had some solid statistical years. He's definitely athletic. So I think draft capital will probably decide that. We just gave the slight edge to Warren.
My only concern with him is that he might be similar to like a Michael Mayer. From some things I've heard is maybe he's not going to be like that elite athlete, just a good athlete. But that's really going to be the differentiator between those two guys for me, is just how they test, and draft capital, of course.
All right. And moving on to our last tier If my mathematics are correct, David, it's your job to define this tier. What are we looking for in our tier 5 here today?
Yeah, basically, these are all players that we think are worth monitoring. The graphic says they're third round prospects, but I really think they all have the ability to move up here. Obviously, they could all fall as well. Draft capital will be the biggest variable. We still want to talk about them in the months leading up to the draft. So this is a pretty big tier here. We honestly wanted to put more people in it because there's a lot more players that are fun to look at in this class. We had to narrow it down enough to fit into the podcast. JP, you want to go ahead and read this pretty lengthy tier for us?
Yeah, we've got a couple of falling quarterbacks with Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Harold Fannin, tight end. We have Woody Marks, Kyron Lacey, Xavier Restrepo, Isaiah Bond, Jordan James, Evan Stewart, and Ty Felton.
Now, these quarterbacks, guys that were with some regularity, I was seeing them mocked in the first round of NFL drafts over the summer. They have both fallen off a bit from some combination of production as well as just some other people performing, I think, a little bit better. If they are first round draft picks, let's say somewhere between 10 and 20-ish in the NFL draft, are we still very excited about them, or have we seen enough warts on their profile that we think they're kind of a mistake if an NFL team invests on them there? Make a decision.
What I'll say is NFL teams are better at evaluating quarterbacks than I am, so I'll trust their judgment to a degree. Like, if they get the draft capital, we have to listen to at least some degree, but I'd be higher on Ewers than Beck personally, just from what I've seen, but they both need to grow a bit more, I think, before they're ready to start for an NFL team.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not top 10 picks, then the hit rate's going to be a lot lower historically for quarterbacks, and these are also guys that aren't really going to run at all. So for fantasy and dynasty, they're going to be on my radar, but I'm not going to be super excited, even if they are kind of mid to the late round one. I mean, maybe with landing spot, but yeah, I'm not very bullish on these guys.
Is Kyron Lacey relative at all to Eddie Lacy? Just out of curiosity.
No idea.
Then I have no interest. If he's not a legacy player, you know me, my legacy players.
Ah, dang. No. Yeah, I mean, there's one legacy player I talked about potentially putting in here is Mason Taylor, tight end at LSU, but we decided to just not quite put him in here based on production. But hey, keep your eye on Mason Taylor. His dad was a tackle in the NFL.
Well, I have no interest in this Lacy. Are you guys interested in him? He's not related to an NFL player, so he can't be any good.
You know, he is the wide receiver one at LSU. Just that alone, there's something to be said for it.
Wide receiver, you.
Depending on who you ask. Like, they're great too. It's hard to say who should hold the title, but that does mean something. He should be able to play outside in the NFL. I don't think he'll be your number one outside X receiver, but he could be like that sacrificial X that like Romeo Dobbs is, where, he'll get enough work and he'll get enough playing time to probably be rostered. I haven't seen enough to think that he's going to be a game changer for anybody.
His production, he's always had some. It hasn't been zero throughout his career, but I mean, last year he's playing behind Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. Hoping for a big step this year. Kind of looked like maybe he was going to take it earlier in the year, but it's kind of dropped off. So the excitement has kind of, wavered a little bit. And another guy that the excitement has wavered on is Evan Stewart. This is somebody that I really liked, and he was talked about as a potential first-round wide receiver. I mean, as a freshman, the guy had 650 receiving yards, which anything over 500 receiving yards as a freshman is very impressive. It doesn't happen all that much, especially like in Big Ten SEC, which he did at SEC at Texas A&M last year. We're hoping for a step forward, but he was hurt. I mean, he started the season fine. He had 500 yards, but then he just missed the end of the year. But it's like, okay, this guy, was very highly recruited. He's he's a ridiculous athlete, actually. But then this year he transferred to Oregon, hasn't really blown up. He's had a lot of mediocre games. I mean, against Ohio State, I know he showed up and had a big touchdown. So I'm still interested in it based on him showing out when he was earlier in college, at least being, fine this year in the athleticism. But I mean, that's why we got him in tier 5, unfortunately. He just has not really taken the step we wanted.
Yeah, he's definitely been a disappointment so far, but the talent is there. And if an NFL team bets on him, we'll probably find ourselves betting on him as well. Just wanted to mention one more deep sleeper, Ty Felton. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, out of Maryland. I don't think any of us had him on our radar going into the season. He's putting up big numbers so far. Again, with him, I'm not sure he'll ever be the guy, but like he's doing well, good with the ball in his hands. He's a good change mover. He's just a solid receiver. I think he'll end up being probably a number 3 on a team for many years.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Harold Fannin Jr. This is something we talked about a good bit, but my gosh, he's at Bowling Green, so he's at a smaller school. But in all of college football, this tight end is what he's listed at. He's third. He's got the third most receiving yards in all of college football. So yeah, this is somebody I was pretty interested in, but then you take a deeper dive. Yeah, there's some places that are like, oh, this guy's a tight end one in the class, but I see that there's a lot of speculation that he might be fullback, H-back kind of player. Mel Kiper has him listed as a fullback because he is 230 pounds, so he's a little bit smaller. But I mean, if he comes in at 240 and he, is very athletic at the combine, there's at least a chance that this guy is a riser, but I mean, the production's insane. It's really
all I heard JP say was he's about Brock Bowers size. Is that also what you heard, David?
Bowers is 240, I think.
That's true. But that's a good point.
JP just called him Brock Bowers.
I mean, this guy, he literally the size of like Nico Collins. I didn't size necessarily.
He's an exciting player for sure, and I think some people do already have him pretty high on draft boards, and it'll be interesting to see how this process plays out for him because his numbers are just absolutely insane.
He'd be super interesting or somebody we don't care about at all, honestly.
He has 0.33 missed tackles forced per reception, which I think is the same as Neighbors last year.
Obviously, the same exact level of competition playing in what is Bowling Green? That's the same thing as CMU. What conference?
MAC, maybe?
The MAC, yeah, the mid.
I want to say the MAC.
Yep, the MAC, CMU, Western Michigan. Just, I mean, compare that to the SEC. It's about the same level of competition. So,
I mean, I will say he played against Penn State and Texas A&M and had over 100 yards against both of those.
That's not nothing. I mean,
yeah.
I'll just touch on these running backs real quick too. Woody Marks is someone who neither of us have looked into enough yet. I know some people that I trust a lot. Ray G over at Destination Devy has him as a first-round player in his latest mock. Not first-round NFL draft, but first-round rookie draft. I think he's definitely someone worth looking into. Jordan James, someone that I like. He had the highest PFF rushing grade last year while splitting time with Bucky Irving, taking over that backfield this year, putting up pretty good numbers. Not exactly sure where he fits into this very crowded running back class, but if he gets the right draft capital, he could also be pretty fun going forward.
And before we end the podcast, I definitely want to make sure to ask you, JP, who is this year's Jalen Coker?
Here's Jalen Coker. Probably this guy named Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Probably the guy I'd say.
That's a good name, honestly. That's someone who I want to look more into too.
Is that just because they have the same first name, or any deeper insights?
Well, he's a deep sleeper, the same name at a small school. So there you go.
Love it, man. The analysis is top shelf. All right. Anybody else you guys really want to touch on? Shout out anything else?
Only thing I'll say about Isaiah Bond is maybe he'll be one of the fastest players of the combine.
I love that.
This is a fun class, and there's, like I said, there's a lot more names than the ones we listed here that are worth looking into. Some of these guys are going to come back. Some more are going to come onto our radar. Definitely fun exercise to go through and dive a little bit deeper into this class.
All right. Well, thank you two for doing such a deep dive to bring to our audience. I did the only thing I'm good at, which is just talking a little bit too much. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope this was as useful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.